Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event with Zabé Ellor. I hope you all are enjoying your evening or day, wherever part of the world you're in. Just as a reminder, if you haven't yet purchased your own copy of Silkfire, you can still do that. If you click a link below from your screen, you can definitely order a copy. At this point, unless you give us a call, we can't promise personalization, but we can promise you a signed copy of the book. So yeah, if you want to give the store a call, we can definitely make sure you get a personalized copy before Zabé leaves. Thank you so much for being here for this event, either in person or virtual. Not only does it support the author, but it supports the store. We're doing wonderful events like this. Of course, we are here for Zabé's first foray into adult Silkfire. It has everything: necromancy, dragons, magic, a little aristocracy. A lot in there that I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy. I'm so far 1/4 of the way in. As someone who has to read a lot of books, I don't always get to read on a schedule, but I'm enjoying it so far. So please, I hope you also give it a chance, and I'll go ahead and leave for Zabé. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, it's so great to be out here tonight and to be talking about the book. So this is a really interesting book for me. It's in a very interesting part of my book journey because, as some of you might know, my debut novel, which came out in 2021, May the Best Man Win, is a YA contemporary novel. And so people may be like, oh, you went into a completely different genre with a completely different age group. But what a lot of people don't know is that Silkfire is actually a book I wrote first. And so it was not the first novel I had written, but it was the first manuscript that I've written that felt like part of me, because it was something I wrote at a time when I was trying to figure out my identity as a trans non-binary person, and it felt very, very raw and precious to me. And I think there was a piece I wrote in for Sci-Fi Now about this. So basically, what Silkfire is about is it's about the main character he's a courtesan, he's a sex worker, and he's seeking revenge on his aristocratic father for being a bit of a dick. And in the sense that he is this terrible, terrible politician who is behind all these mass evictions and mass poverty. And he's had some very personal run-ins with the protagonist in the past. And they also live in this matriarchal, dystopian world, and within this society where men and masculinity is this stigmatized gender. And so when I started writing this, I had never written a queer male character before. I had never written a male character who struggled with masculinity and with gender. And so the part of the process of writing this book was really coming into myself and creating this space where it felt okay for me to explore masculinity, where I could construct the ideas of masculinity in a way that really resonated with me and felt accessible. And was really influential to me when I was writing this was actually The Power by Naomi Alderman, which is a science fiction book about this world where women gain this power to literally electrify people by touching them, and they use this as a weapon to kind of overthrow the patriarchy and build their own world. And I was really fascinated by how that book represented an upheaval of traditional power dynamics. But I also thought it was kind of limited because, it focused mostly on the victory and mostly on the lived experiences of the female characters, that then you also had kind of some glimpses of what men in this world were going through. And I found that very interesting because, it was in some ways a revenge fantasy. Obviously the female characters in this world had reasons to feel this anger. And, I'm assigned female at birth. I grew up presenting as a woman and having those lived experiences. And so I sympathized with that anger, but I also sympathized with the male characters and thought, experiencing violence because of your gender is a terrible experience, no matter who is perpetuating that on you. And so that was kind of what led me into writing this world in Silkfire, was to write masculinity in a way that felt reachable for me, and also to write about violence as it happens, not just because of gender, because the patriarchy it doesn't mean the same thing everywhere. It's a very mutable construct, but to kind of tie that into power structures and show how gender violence is linked to existing power structures, how it can be linked in a culture, and specifically in a violent culture, because the main setting of this book is the War District in this giant planet-sized city. Each district represents a different god, a different trade, a different industry. And so the main character's home in the War District was once this powerful empire that conquered the rest of the city, that attempted to conquer the rest of the city and did a lot of harm on the way. And so that violence is kind of baked in to their culture, and it shows in how they treat men, especially men working in a very gendered profession like sex work. And so what I'm going to be reading is from the first chapter, and this is a scene where Corey, the main character, he is attending a wedding. He is attempting to make a connection with a powerful politician in order to further his revenge plot. And he is navigating all these different gendered obstacles in order to achieve his goals. And also someone might be trying to kill him. Chapter 1. The father of the groom stopped halfway up the aisle to spit in my face. With the bright store of essence tied to my soul, I could have dodged. But I didn't believe another man would behave so crudely in public until the hot, wet missile struck my cheek. The guests, mostly wealthy Zawa, with a few engineers for added prestige, tittered and laughed. My pale skin went scarlet. I yearned for the pavilion to collapse on my head. Whore, the groom's father growled. You humiliate chaste men and rob essence from our marriages. Behind that pretty face, your soul is shit and worms. I said nothing. I couldn't deny the charge. All Victory Street knew Horatius of Brightstock, courtesan and proprietor of the high-kissed brothel. And I stood out starkly beside this man, who, though dressed in rich purple velvet, had the lined face and prominent pores of a doll. He'd invested most of his essence in his child, leaving him weak and warm. But I'd gathered essence from my patrons in their pleasure, brightening myself with flawless skin, racing wits, and the strength to shatter steel. Small wonder this man's wife had hired me to warm her bed tonight. The groom's father marched on, to the dais, where his wife and the bride ceremonially haggled over dowry goods. The groom stood between them, silent in a skirt of translucent white, staring at me like his eyes could dagger an unwelcome guest. Spit was sliding down my neck, and I'd brought nothing to wipe it away. I couldn't move, I couldn't act. I deserved this shame. I'd accepted a contract for a wedding, and invaded the most important day of the young groom's life. I'd done it not for money, not even for essence, but for an excuse to get in and introduce myself to the woman I hoped to place on the imperial throne. My long and winding path to vengeance, sundering another family. And so essence is this type of, it's a bit like a magical currency, a magical energy. Within this world, people hold it within their bodies, and it makes you stronger and more attractive, more compelling in different ways. And while it is something of a commodity that is traded among people, there's also this that people tend to give up essence to their partners during sex. And so that is why Korea has so much of it. And that is also why you have stigma and fear against sex workers in the society, because they're seen as taking this resource that is not rightfully theirs. "It's okay," whispered a serving man with long dark hair, passing me a tissue. "Your client made the mess, not you." I wiped my cheek and neck as the ceremony began. The groom's father trembled as he touched his son's temples. Space fluttered around them, a flock of soundless starlings. The lines on the father's cheek deepened, cracking through his makeup. Silver furrowed through dark hair, and the skin of his chin sank low. But light bloomed in the boy's eyes, turning his red irises deep as wine, tightening pale curls and deepening muscle lines, shaping alluring beauty from a merely pleasing smile. The last tie. I hoped the groom enjoyed this part of the ceremony, if nothing else. He'd surrender most of his essence to his wife before she chose to conceive. He'd never shine so bright again. But Victory Street would know him for a good Zawa husband, a respectable member of the ruling class, and most men found that a worthy trait. The groom's mother gave the wedding speech, detailing the goods she'd exchanged with her son. She and the bride signed the contract, then, fashionably progressive, let the groom sign too. The bride nicked her finger and the groom's on a ceremonial razor and pressed both together. As the cheering crowd pressed forward to congratulate her, I sought my mark. Akizeke Shikiya Shishir Zawashige, magistrate of Armory Street, pushed to the head of the receiving line and embraced the bride. Her eyes were the stewing hue of old blood. Her white blonde hair fell neatly to her chin. Crow's feet and stretch marks lent her maturity and wisdom, and the wedding pavilion shook in echo of her laugh, the picture of a traditional politician, albeit one with little traction so far in her campaign to succeed or dying judge. But if she chose me as one of her campaign strategists, I'd have every notable from southernmost Coldwater District to the blighted border of the Lost District demanding her ascension. Every wealthy lip on Victory Street would endorse her for the throne with the same eagerness as they begged me for private sins. I'd spent years preparing for this moment, building connections, collecting debts. I would flip the secession contest over as easily as I dangled downwards onto the dancing floor. Or that was what I'd told myself this morning. And now a Zawa magistrate was walking past me on her way to the bar, draped in gold and sparkling steel. Her stagnant campaign needed help, but suddenly it seemed I'd have an easier time restoring the gods to life than convincing Akizeke to put our political future in the hands of a sex worker. "Pardon me, magistrate," I said as she passed, lifting a hand. "If I may have a word." "A photograph, of course." Akizeke flashed me a toothy grin, a politician's grin even dull eyes could pick out from miles away. She slung an arm around my hip and pulled me in, closer than I normally let strangers come without charging. The serving man who'd given me the tissue, one of her personal staff perhaps, shouldered his camera. "Think how pissed off your father will be if he sees his bastard making nice with his chief rival." His only remaining rival. I smiled as the orange hold light bulb flashed. A piece of photo paper back below the lens, slowly resolving. The glare off Akizeke's gold-trimmed pauldrons had wiped my face from the image. "Actually, magistrate, I'd love to speak with you about my father and the campaign." She patted my shoulder and tucked those blurred-out photos into my sash. "Hold on to these. Tell your future children how you met me just a month before I ascended to the judgeship." "Thank you, and I will." I tried to sound gracious, grateful, but I had to make my proposal before someone more important stole their way. "You're my political role model. How you defended Armory Street's salvage rights on the border, how you funded the War District's museums. I only wanted to know, are you looking to hire more campaign strategists? I have excellent references. Akizeke considered me. I shivered under her plodding gaze. You're young, pretty, well-connected. But there's 100 million other boys in that exact same position. If you want a job on my campaign, earn it. My cheeks flamed. Venomous whispers in the pit of my stomach hissed fool and imposter. But I hadn't come empty-handed. I spoke for my aunt and her allies. I could offer Akizeke a powerful block of supporters. Magistrate Akizeke, a young man clad in green and white, like a living lily on the stem, shouldered in between us. Have you scheduled a date for your concession speech? I need to file permits for my candidate's coronation parade. She laughed. Announcing 6 foreign endorsements in one day was an excellent trick, Zegakadze Kazage. Your boss scared half the candidates into dropping out. But tricks won't keep me from my throw. And when I rule as judge, I won't need parades and parties to prove I have power. Shaking her head, still chuckling, Akizeke set off towards the Bourbon fountain with the hungry purpose of stalking round. Well, she certainly had an ego sized for the judge's throne. You're looking for a campaign job, Kore? Zegakadze Kazage, Zega, as he'd bid me call him when we'd been a couple, turned to me, faint humor playing around his lips. Brown curls framed his fair face in casual disarray. A natural progression from sex work. Only in politics, you don't get to wear a condom if someone fucks you over. I hardly bother with prophylactics. Getting a prescription costs a fortune. Quite a few inappropriate itches plagued me when I entered the industry, but I gained immunity when I brightened. I'm sorry to hear that, he said. I wished I could believe him. His pillow-soft words too often concealed slaps. You don't want to work for Akizeke. She's too far behind to win. Join us. Magistrate Vasha will find you a place in his campaign staff. As a pretty party favor, as his son, he loves you underneath everything. He's always asking me to tell stories about you. How convenient. He becomes caring father the moment a visible bastard can hurt his career most. Who does he plan to marry me to in exchange for their support? It can't be anyone too important. I'm used goods. I would never let him marry you off against your will, because I still care for you. He declared that like a gambler revealing a winning hand. But I knew what was written on the back of his cards. You didn't protect me from my marriage, Jorge. You didn't care enough, and you owe me yourself for that. I was done with being someone else's tool, even if they said they loved me, even if they were my own skin and bone. If it meant I had a heart of stone, so be it. Only stone survived Victory Street untouched. How are we doing on time? Awesome. My client was posing for photographs with her new daughter-in-law. Akizeke was circling the pavilion shaking hands. I had more than enough time to learn how far Zega would play this. How kind of you, I purred to my ex, offering him my arm. Shall we go for a walk and discuss? He slid his elbow through mine. The lily perfume drenching and flooded my nose, blooming from the lace choker at his throat. My skin tingled where his delicate blue veins brushed my inner wrist, a dead reflex. My brain, not my heart, led me now in the great and small games I played. Careful to keep my smile vapid and my steps directionless and light, I led us outside the tent and onto a granite walking path. The wedding pavilion ran along the top of the stone dragon, a massive ancient sculpture carved to mark some pointless and bloody victory. Its hollow body held only 70,000 apartments, making it one of Victory Street's smaller buildings and one of the quietest. Even my bright, sensitive ears couldn't find the background din of hobbly traffic, arguing voices and clashing jazz harmonies that rang out life on Victory Street. The Zawa landlady who owned this building had raised rent and driven folks from apartments they'd rented for generations, turning her building into a luxury address for the rich and bright. All because Magistrate Vashathike had undone the old rent control laws. Zawa, who'd sworn a man couldn't rule Victory Street, now praised him as an innovator while stuffing their bank accounts. The dull children begging on the yellow and brontosaurus-sized cobblestones of Victory Streets, their ranks swollen from mass evictions. New Magistrate Vashitike by recruiting mates and bullying was the tamest I'd ever been. My father had picked wrong when he bullied me. This is such a boring building, Zega moaned. Forget my cousin's wedding. Let's jump down to the crossway and find a jazz bar. With how bright we both shine, we could be dancing together in minutes, and the whole place would line up to buy us drinks. You're a respectably employed widow. You can show off your essence. People get upset if I remind them of bastard sex worker can punch through sheet metal. What's the point of power if you can't have a little fun? He pulled a compact from his purse and flipped it open. Red powder flashed inside. Zega grinned, then ducked into the sheltering nook of the stone dragon's carved empty eye socket. I slipped in after him, bending my tall head to hit his face. Power isn't a toy, I said, as he snorted powder. Of the war district's influence, but also fit up your nose. We almost use what little we have strategically. Or, he held out the contract. I shook my head. Or we could simply accept the slow death of our world and enjoy the fall on our way down. Be as tiresome as you wish, Croatia. You'll never bore these beacons to burn bright. He tapped the side of the socket. Once, everlasting ruby fire had burned in the great statue's eyes, reflecting the glory of our massive neighborhood's dragons. But the dragons had died with the gods, and the supply of fresh essence they breathed had dwindled to drought. The temple district had crumbled into the lost district, from which no explorers returned. The survivors of the cataclysm, and the wars that preceded it, had brokered a citywide peace, ensuring no district would lose valuable essence in the battlefield dead. They had created the playing field Zega and I stood on today. No battles, fewer bombings, higher stakes. Zega, I hissed. My ex shivered at the first brush of a high. Listen to me. I can't work for Vashitike, but that doesn't mean there's no hope for us. You're no longer a boy trapped in a bad marriage. Don't keep following Vashitike's bloody path to power. Take your skills and connections. Help me get on Akizake's good side. We can raise her to the judgeship. Together. My heart stuttered on the final line. Reckless. Bidding so plainly for his loyalties was a game. Even if all I stood to lose was a faint, flickering hope I could fix our relationship if we tried again. Elevate Akizeke and share half the credit with you, he scoffed. You've grown more selfish since you left, or perhaps you've just grown more like your father. The comparison ground into me like broken ice. My parentage was an open secret, and people often compared my looks and manners to Vashitike's. But Zega knew my history and saw the deeper tie. I, like my father, wove plots and treacheries behind gold-lined scarlet eyes. I was born with Vashitike's face stamped on mine. You chose to serve him. My voice rose, half hysterical, slipping beyond my control. Have you forgotten how he had me and my mother thrown out on the streets? Have you forgotten that I saved you? Steel flickered behind his soft blue eyes. I follow Vashitike because he's strong, not because he's good. Strength will put him on the throne. Kindness and charity have brought me nothing but your dagger in my soul. I flinched. Had my leaving really made him this ruthless? Or perhaps I'd been so greedy for love I'd overlooked his darkness. My love turned to ash in my fingers, a bastard, a whore, a monster's son. Maybe only cruel, fetid hearts could safely love me. True hearts I devoured. Wine, gentle Zawa? Came the meek, rough-edged voice of the dog. Akizake's servant man, the one who'd given me a tissue, clambered clumsily into the socket I'd easily left inside. Wine glasses rattled on his tray. His long, dark eyes peered out from beneath a low brow, capping a thin, straight-nosed face. He stood shorter than me, broad shoulders corded thick with muscle. Knife scars laced the gold-brown canvas of his chest. With his long, tied-back hair and his untrimmed goatee, he painted a portrait of trouble. Zega snatched a glass, swirling sunlight-pale wine below his nose. The bouquet's off, he said. Are your senses so dull you can't spot a bad wine? Zega! My eyebrows arched. I turned to the servant man, whose smile masked any anger at Zega's slight, and took a glass for myself. I'm sorry for my friend's rudeness. You walked far to bring us these, and you were so kind to me at the ceremony. Let me tip you. And no need, Zawa. Please, enjoy your drink. Of course there's a need. Little luxuries meant everything to living doll. I grabbed a golden Thera and reached for the sash of his black uniform skirt. He tried to dodge, but I was brighter, quicker. I tucked the coin in the band. My fingers licked the edge of a blade. The sash spilled its jingling contents as my bloody hand flew free. Grappling hooks, wire cables, throwing stars, lockpicks, and, exposed atop his skirt, the hilt of a sword, a long, single-edged blade in the scholarly district tradition. Lethal weapons had been illegal since the fall of the gods. Assassin, I whispered, and his placid servant simper cracked into a wicked grin. Fear washed out my propriety, awakened my abominable anger. My motion blurred as the flat of my wrist slammed into his throat. My wineglass fell to shatter with the others as his tray dropped. I pinned him in a shadowed, rain-worn crevasse in the marble, my bare chest pressed to his. Who hired? Am I your mark, or are you after Zega? He struggled, but body to body, only brightness mattered in this contest. The knot of his throat trembled as his breathing sped. His steel bracers dropped helplessly against the stone, but his eyes, dark brown and black, refused to flicker right in fear. They slipped over me and found Zega, rapid as a racing hovercraft. No one hired me. Your friend brought my enmity himself. With a defiant grin, he shrugged off the Theve cloth covering his shoulder. A poem in old GK glyphs, shaped like a bell, tattooed the broad muscle beneath. Ashen ruins it read. Physies of the slate pile. Zega sniffed, then poured out his swirling wine. A green film clung to the glass. Should the gang leader have people to do his poisoning for him? Physies of the slate pile. A name cursed by Zawa, merchants, guards, and lawyers. A dull immigrant man who controlled 50,000 illegal apartments in Victory Street slate pile, offering cheap housing the law couldn't reach. A legend bringing hope to naive dogs. In flesh, this legend smells of sweat and ashes. I have people and places that'll scare you shitless, Aziz said. This is personal, Zega. Under your orders, Vashatike's guards evicted 600 of my apartments last week. A collapsed cavern of hold-power charges. People of mine are sleeping on the streets. 72 have died, mostly children. Killing me won't bring back their essence, Zega yawned. It'll only destroy my essence store alongside theirs. Mine's 1,000,000 times brighter. Faziz thrashed, his dark eyes locked on my hand, murderous intent. Would he bite free? It's not about essence, you reeking shit. It's about people. Everything's about essence, Zega said. Or money, or power. You're as foolish as Quraishi's up here if you think the world is any different. Faziz's eyes flickered to me. Quraish is a bright star. The court isn't. He named my occupation without the customary twist of judgment. Let me go. Whispers below the street. Want to keep the throne. Zega Kadze is your father's dirty right hand. Let me cut him off, and neither man rises. Let me cut him off. I shivered, not slacking my grip. Did Faziz know how spite had kept me alive, my early years of sex work, dreams of Zega's shattered skull, and my fists painted red? 3 young men, alone, body to body. The Zawa at the wedding flecked their tongues at the promised indecency. They'd lean in to glimpse the rude spectacle, unbelievable would turn to murder. We 3 all had bloody fingers in our hearts. Did you order mass evictions? I asked Zega, my voice thin as strangling wire. Vashatike isn't afraid to protect Victory Street from criminals. Zega drew his baton, and I'm not afraid to protect myself. Silver flashed off the weapon's scalloped sides. I recognized it. You still carry the baton I gave you? Strange hope fluttered in my heart. Of course. He pressed a hand to my bare back, drawing me close. Beneath me, Faziz cursed in a language I didn't know. I haven't forgotten you, Corey. Maybe we can start again. Maybe I'll leave your father's campaign for you, if you kill this doll. Manipulative asshole. Aziz gasped as I pushed harder. Come on, Red Eyes, this scheming shit isn't worth my blood on your manicure. This isn't you, I told Zega, because he wouldn't care if I said I don't want this to be me again. That's my father's bloodlust, she cried. Aziz would have poisoned you, too. I deserve it. I met Aziz's eyes, tried to make my point over the hammering of my heart. No one dies today. I flung the outlaw over my hip and out into open air. Zega cursed and leaned out into space. Gravity's light tug had already pulled Aziz 5 stories down. My ex seemed to consider leaping after, but while our world's natural gravity wouldn't kill a fallen human, giving chase meant missing the reception. I could have you arrested as his accomplice, Corey. Try. My words came out. I had no energy left to please him. Zega had driven children from their homes, had urged me to murder on the promise of a kiss. I'd been foolish, appealing to his good nature, believing something genuine lingered between us. I'd been arrogant, hoping Akizeke would see me as a potential ally, someone worth her time. The tears blurring my eyes stung with more frustration than sorrow. Even how I broke down was ugly and wrong. What was I doing with my life? Believing a sex worker could bring down Vashatike, who reached to rule 1/20th of the planet? But I'd sacrificed too much for revenge, safety, purity, 8 years of my life. Stop fighting. My world had revolved around Vashatike's ambition since before my conception. If I wasn't his enemy, I'd be his pawn. And with his minions driving the poor from their apartments, I wanted to be his enemy. As I stared at my ex, trying to decide between choking him or asking him to hold me, gravity flexed like a fist on the back of my neck. A frozen wind billowed down from the north. Zega's eyes widened and he pointed over my shoulder. Do you see that too, Corey? I turned. On the edge of my bright vision, between hover bells and the spires of the sea, a floating black bar shadowed the foot of Victory Street. A hover ship. The dark iron craft was long and narrow, tapered to a wedge on the ventral side. Silver swirls of pulpit substance, its sheen and texture between plastic and metal, traced faces on its flanks, women, men, and children screaming in agony. White gold figureheads with lifted axes and smiled at cool grins. Not a wisp of exhaust escaped as we heard the sounds to float as a black bar against the sun. I see it, I said. It's uninviting. I've only seen pictures of these craft in school books, Zega whispered. A tangled mix of awe and terror had pressed the guile from his voice. That ship is temple destroyed, from the age of the gods. A shiver spider stepped down my spine. That's impossible. Nothing and no one has left the lost 10,000 years. I'd sooner expect to eat my mother's shade than travelers from that urban neighborhood. We stood silent for a breath, watching it hover and hum. Shadows that might have been crew or my imaginings crawled over its silver faces. All down Victory Street, windows dropped open and whispers of awe rose high. From one sill, a very illegal antique rifle pointed up at the crowd until a steel-ringed hand pushed it back inside. Even the cobblestones seemed to hold their breath. Nothing drew my street together like the prospect of conflict. Maybe they've come to witness this historic occasion, Zega suggested, me elevating the first male judge to the throne of war. A tiny, bitter laugh fluttered up in me, and died when I realized he meant it. Legends didn't rise to mark the deeds of upjumped commoners and bastards. Zega and I had swept fragments of power together to build our lives on Victory Street, but history and majesty belonged to true-blooded Zabé. The years that had transformed the lost district into legend would crush us smaller than footnotes. But my own insignificance gave me freedom. I feared no fable knight more than my father winning the power to shatter my life again. They've come to support Akizeke, I said. They only don't know it yet. Traveling diplomats all sought the same comforts, whether they came from neighboring districts or the ancient mists of time. Once they fell into my arms, I'd collect their endorsements for Akizeke before anyone could lure them to my father's cause. she'd have to appoint me a strategist then. And I've ruined Vasha Fike's dreams of power as neatly as he ruined my dreams of father's love. Oh, that was chapter 1.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, either in person or virtual, and now is the time for questions. If you have any, go ahead and submit them now. We'll go ahead and start asking. First question, Silkfire is so ambitious as a first novel. How many revisions would you say went into it?
Yes, so this is, so I wrote the first draft back in 2017. And then it was actually it was a much shorter draft because that draft had many significant changes. Faziz did not have a very large role. There was a talking cat, and there was a lot less. My agent made me cut the talking cat. There was a lot more sex, and there was a lot less angst. And then I had a very good critique partner who was like, I really don't understand what's going on in Corey's heads and why he's doing these things and why he's feeling these things. And because so much of the story is the romance, there's a polyamorous romance between Corey, Faziz, and another woman, Ria, who shows up in chapter 2. And so my critique partner said to me, you need to put in more angst and more emotion to really make the romance work. And so that was the draft where I added the angst. And then I sent it to my agent. Had previously, so I got my agent back in. I was an agent in 2017 for a YA fantasy that didn't sell, and then which I'm currently revising into an adult fantasy actually. And so she saw that second draft, and she looked it over, and I had already rewritten Faziz's story arc once, and she looked at it a second time and was like, you need to get rid of the talking cat, and you need to figure out what you're doing with Faziz. And that was awful because, I had always envisioned Faziz as this character who is, he's not from within, like, the bright people that make up the inner circle of the society. He has less essence. He is what they call dull. He's an outsider. And so it's kind of difficult to write a character in kind of a court fantasy, a high fantasy where so much revolves around the power of the different players. It's hard to write a character who doesn't have power. And so what I eventually realized is that his power is going to be that he is, he's a criminal. He's kind of that roguish archetype, but he's really breaking the law because someone has to, because this is a society that provides no security, no social safety net, and a lot of that function in society is taken up by organizations that are criminal by default, because it's pretty much impossible to rent apartments from anyone who is not a member of the super rich Zawa class, the Zawa Shige family. And so, they have this very tight monopoly over real estate. So someone like Faziz, who is this outsider and who is running his own unlicensed apartment building, that gives him power of a different form. And so once I kind of realized that was his power, then that kind of got me to the second major draft that I did. And then we sent that around to a few editors, and we kind of got the feedback that the inciting incident wasn't very clear. And so, because there's a lot of different plot threads going on, you have a political plot, and you have a romantic plot, and you have this big supernatural plot about, the Lost District waking up, and these dead gods that are stirring and creating trouble and chaos in this world. And so then I did yet another round of edits to clarify the plot. And then the book finally sold. It took 14 months. It was on submission for 14 months, and then the book finally sold. And after that, I did more revisions with my editor, but the plot and the whole structure was basically set in stone at that point. And what I was basically doing at that point was working to figure out the math of this world, this city of Jadzia, and figuring out, okay, how many people live here? How do they feed all of these people? How do they generate power? How is the government structured? So that was when I did a lot of the hard numbers world building and figured out a lot of the origin of this world, and a lot of it didn't even wind up in the final draft. It's all this stuff kind of rattling around in my head for the future.
Excellent. The lore. How did you develop this magic system which deals with elemental and essence?
Yeah, so I'd kind of always known the idea of the essence system, because it represents kind of how you give parts of yourself away, and kind of how in a capitalist society, even parts of yourself, your selfhood, are kind of commodities you can buy and sell. So one of the things we learn about Kore is that when he was dating Zega Kadste, Zega, is that he wound up losing a lot of his essence to Zega, losing a lot of his selfhood to Zega, because he cared more about Zega than Zega cared about him, and Zega was just using him to drain him. So it's this very real manifestation of it's a metaphor for kind of how power manifests in social dynamics, and how it's hoarded, how it's invested in people, and kind of how people can be really dehumanized and seen as commodities. And then you have this essence system, which is a separate system, and that was really just something I needed to make up to make the city planet work in my head, because it's okay, you can't have a pipe that goes, you can't put plumbing into a skyscraper. I have this one building called the Surrender, which is half the size of downtown Manhattan at its base. And so it's okay, you can't really put plumbing into this. So I invented this magical substance called Hold Water. So this is called Hold Air, Hold Fire, Hold Light, that allow for elemental magic. And so it's kind of an artisan-like system where you have these substances, and they are shaped, and they are worked, and they are built, and they let you do all these cheating physics things that make it possible to build a giant city. And kind of the cool thing about that is those substances are transmuted from the essence left behind in the souls of the dead. So one of the rituals in this planet is that when you die, your body and the fragments of your soul that are left behind in your body will then be transmuted, and your family will sell that material, and that will be used to continue to build the city.
I'd hate to have my essence sold and turned into a bidet. Anyway, so this question is so silly, I love it. It's a two-parter. First, what is one of your favorite books? You just name it, and then the second part happens.
What?
So, what's one of your favorite books?
Okay. I guess I'd say The Fifth Season by H. Emerson.
Excellent. Now, Silkfire has to face that book in combat. What weapons or strategies does your book use?
Okay, so, well, God, it depends on which character, because with Corey, he's dead. Actually, they're all just dead. Every single, because the great thing about the Fifth Season is the main character, Esun, she doesn't give a fuck. She kind of maybe considered giving a fuck at one point. She doesn't. And my characters they're very self-conscious. They think a lot about their obligations and their social connections, and do I want to offend this person? Do I run that risk? Do I take to calculate? They like to think a lot about how to solve problems, even the more martially inclined ones. And And yeah, the main character of the fifth season, she just like if there's a problem, she kills it, and then she doesn't have a problem anymore. So yeah, the fifth season would win.
Awesome. She's like, nope, my book's gonna die. Other than The Power, what other books or authors would you say have influenced your writing style?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think especially in fantasy, obviously the big influence I had going into this book was Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey, which is another court fantasy revolving around a courtisan who finds herself caught in intrigue. It's one of the first books I ever read with a bisexual character. And it was also kind of the first time I'd read a character in fantasy who used their interpersonal skills and their emotional connections. You know, someone who maybe in like another book, this character would have been like the love interest, kind of a damsel in distress. You know, it's really, I really loved how that book showcased how you can have a fantasy hero who kind of saves the day with softer skills and with love and compassion. I think some other books that were very formative to me. Definitely, this is a good one. I think City of Brass was also a big influence because I loved how well S.A. Shocker 40 balances the political plot lines and as well as the magic and the world building of this world and multiple POVs, and that's very skillful. And I think another book I've really loved lately, The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, which is a beautiful secondary world queer fantasy, set in an India inspired fantasy world that has queer-lady protagonists and a terrifying magical plague and sentient buildings.
Wonderful, thank you. Last question for time. What are you working on next or currently?
So my next fantasy novel is YA fantasy called No Better Than Beasts, and it is a retelling of The Nutcracker. And so it's very dark. It's about a pair of siblings. They each have grown up with this abusive older brother kind of lording over them. And so they find themselves, one is a wizard and one is a ballerina, and they find themselves drawn into this conflict on opposite sides of the war between the Rat King and the Pinewood Prince. And there is a lot of romance and kissing and a lot of and I got to do a lot of description of like frozen forests and castles made of candy, and there's a lot of mushy like feeling stuff. So if you like books about like healing and like feeling happy, but you have to suffer a lot to get there, this would be a really if you like Hurt Comfort. This is if you like Hurt Comfort, but I know better than these two like Hurt Comfort. And that one is out in, I think right now it's scheduled for February 2024.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and being in person. Let's give Zabé a round of applause. Thank you, everyone who tuned in virtually. Unfortunately, I do have to shut off the broadcast at this point because now it is the signing portion of the event, and I'm pretty sure you just don't want to watch Zabé sign books. Or maybe you do, I don't know. People do watch mukbangs anyway. I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you're at. And remember, you can still get your own copy of Silkfire if you haven't yet. Just click the link below. Have a good one. Bye.